Hello, I'm Alan. I lead the development of the toolsets related to the state connector system, Attestation client in particular. Together with David and Luca, we're here to help you better understand the system. So we will be answering your questions. As Max already said, the topics of primary focus are how to become attestation provider, operate attestation client and blockchain nodes, and also how to propose and add new attestation types or events, and how in general the state's connector system can be used in third-party applications on Flare like dApps, smart contracts, and so on. So most of information about these topics can be found in the documentation of the repos we have published past week. There are several repos. We repost links also on the channel, text channel. They include attestation suite with attestation provider, a library for connecting to different blockchains called multi-chain client. Then we have a repo of Docker containers for external blockchain nodes. And we also have one repo called state connector attestation types, where definitions for attestation types can be proposed. So yeah, we are open for your questions, so please. So we might provide some initial introduction of the system to encourage you to give us some questions. So what is the state connector system? It's a system that allows bringing validated data from external sources to the blockchain, Flare, and then smart contracts and dApps can act upon this data and be sure that that this data is verified. For example, like initial concept or initial use case that we used was motivated by our FSET system, which is in the development. And a part of it is confirming transactions on other chains. For example, a transaction on a Bitcoin chain. If somebody makes a transaction for a certain amount, sending, let's say, 1 Bitcoin to a specific address, it makes a transaction, and then it has to wait for confirmation time, which is about 1 hour on Bitcoin network. And then it can request the state connector system, please check, verify the transaction with this and this transaction ID. And then this user basically submits the request to the smart contract, state connector smart contract. This request is collected. Attestation providers have attestation clients. This is a software which are listening to the requests. They collect requests into packages, and then they verify those things on different sources, among which is also a Bitcoin blockchain. And for this specific request, they check, okay, I want to check if this transaction with this ID exists on the Bitcoin chain. And then if it exists, it extracts certain data, like source address, destination address, amounts transferred, and maybe payment reference, such things like data about the transaction, which can be used somewhere, yeah. And then it extracts those data. We call this attestation response for the request, and then this attestation client makes a hash of this data. And then in this package of transactions collected, it does this for every transaction, and some they don't exist or they don't match certain conditions. Those are not confirmed, but others are confirmed, meaning that the data, the relevant data is extracted and hashed. All those hashes are assembled into Merkle tree, and the Merkle root is sent as a vote result, like confirmation result, by attestation client to the state connector contract. This is done in 2 phases, commit reveal scheme, and then after some time, this time is like a few minutes, the state connector contract counts the majority Merkle roots that get committed. If that majority exists, that Merkle root becomes confirmed. And then this is all what the state connector contract does. And then how one can act on this proof. So this data, the extracted data for this specific confirmation for our Bitcoin transaction is present in this Merkle root as a hash and in a tree. So we can do a cryptographic proof. Basically, we can extract that data and then create a Merkle proof, which are basically hashes on a path to the Merkle root. And we can indicate the package ID, or we call it round ID, and we can send this to some smart contract. And that smart contract basically can try to reproduce Merkle root, taking that data, which is now fully present to the contract, hashing it, applying Merkle proof, and what comes out, it should match the Merkle root that it's accepted by the state connector as majority. And if this is true, then the contract can say, okay, this data is confirmed. And now I can believe that this piece of data, like you can imagine it like a JSON with source, target address, all this transaction data. And suddenly now this contract to which I send this has all this data, and it independently verified that it's correct, and it can act upon it. For example, if that payment was to open some service in a contract, by submitting this, I submitted the proof that I did this payment, and the contract can open access to something. Yeah, this is in general the idea. And then maybe just adding just this. So this was an example of how to transfer and prove and prove the data about a transaction on a Bitcoin chain to some smart contract, so it can act upon the proof. But the same concept can be used for any data source. Yeah. So attestation type or attestation event is the type of data for which, like in this case, is a payment on a Bitcoin blockchain, but it could be like data existence of certain tweet with certain information. And it can be also in a similar manner proved and used in some smart contract and act upon it. Yeah? This is in general how the system works. So yeah, I hope I motivated you well, so you can ask some questions.
Actually, Alan, there's a good question that came through earlier from Flare Community. They're just asking about whether attestation providers are required to run nodes for all assets integrated with Flare. Are you able to talk a little bit more about that? They also said thank you for hosting a great AMA. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So yeah, the question is whether a particular attestation provider needs to run attestation, needs to do attestation for all supported, I would say, blockchains in this case. Yeah, in general, it's all sources and all attestation types. So in this primary design, the answer is yes. Yeah. But we are considering extensions of these designs. Basically, in primary design, we have in state connector, as it was presented in a community call, some security mechanism, which is kind of, you can imagine, like a supervision of these default attestation providers on local nodes by private attestation providers. And if default attestation providers do not vote out something which is not true, and the private ones object to it, the node, my private node, can fork. Yeah? So in in this context, it's important that it's kind of all or nothing. Yeah, it turned out to be important. But we actually are designing the systems where we have, like, you can imagine, like, one Merkle tree represents all the supported things in a state connector contract, and it has built in this forking mechanism. Yeah? Now we are thinking of a system, also parallel system, which is also all or nothing, which does not involve the forking mechanism. And we have also some ideas where it could be like more community driven, where it's not necessary to be all for or nothing for all attestation types. You can choose just certain groups, like bets in sport or Twitter things and so on. So yeah, we are kind of trying to do this in multi-level, but initially now the system, it's all or nothing.
But yeah, maybe we can add that device or allow sharing of some infrastructure at the beginning, so multiple attestation providers could use the same Bitcoin node, because these things require quite a lot of performance, server-wise, data-wise, and so on.
Yeah, in terms of infrastructure, in the bootstrap, so ideally it would be that everybody has its own infrastructure.
Yeah.
But in terms of this phase of bootstrapping things, some infrastructure can be shared. But that, what I was answering, is in terms of what attestation types you support, and you have to support all of them.
Yeah.
Hi guys. First and foremost, thank you so much for hosting this AMA. I was wondering, since nodes can be very expensive to run, are there any financial incentives for attestation providers to support the network and to continue providing support in the form of newly added nodes or integrated chains?
Yeah, so in essence, we're aiming towards some rewarding system, but this is still in the development. So we are thinking of next step to be grants for attestation providers. And this is the way how we primarily want to bootstrap the system. Yeah. So that's one thing, and other is also what Luca said. Yeah, in initial phases, some infrastructure can be shared. For example, maybe one important thing with the architecture in regarding of blockchains is that we put between the attestation client and the actual node some indexer. Yeah, and this indexer is basically reading things from blockchain into database, and basically somebody can host a node and an indexer and offer this as a service to others. But as I said, it's intended at the end that due to decentralization, that people would have as independent infrastructure as possible. Yeah. But these are kind of directions for first steps for rolling this out.
Thanks for your question, Black community.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate that. We had another question coming in from nerdherd.ai, just asking how many attestation providers will there be? Are you able to talk a little bit more about how many we sort of Flare intend to sort of come into the system?
We don't have yet the clear number. Yeah, we do have this concept of the default set, and it is envisaged like that at least initially the default set will include kind of top FTSO providers. But then it's also important for us to develop the community of so-called private attestation providers, which nodes can use for independent checking in this forking mechanism. But for now, I think we don't have a number, but it's a plan to kind of provide grants to for startup to some group of candidates, which will probably come from this FTSO providers community. So the numbers will be probably published first once we start the grants, and this is probably will happen soon, but there are not exact dates yet.
Thanks, Alan. That's great. Thanks for the question, Nerdherd. There's a question that's just come in from Blasnostras, saying, what are the main use cases Flare is hoping to see this technology used for to start with?
So the main motivation was our F-asset system for those types. You can see in one, there are 4 types we support now. They include mostly things related to payments on blockchains, and those can be extended to other blockchains. But then we are looking into community to provide interesting use cases. There are already some DeFi projects which showed interest and provided use cases, and we are kind of trying to develop new attestation types. But it's our focus is basically to encourage innovation by community for additional attestation types, and it would be really interesting to see some use cases which involve, let's say, not just this payment data from other blockchains, but Web2 data from existing applications with large communities, like social networks, gaming communities, and these kind of things. But we don't have any specific ideas we would tell you, because this is kind of development, new business models in a sense, in general.
Thanks, Alan. And thanks for the question, Bless. We had another question, actually a follow-up from Nerdherd, asking what the hardware requirements would be for nodes running the existing 7 tokens. And just asking for a little bit more clarity in terms of time frame. Are you guys able to provide a little bit more information on that?
So,
well, at the moment, we were testing, and we are running nodes on 8-core computers with 2 tera disks, and it's working fine. And attestation client is running on 4-core computer with 16 gig of memory, and it's also running very smoothly on 15%. So we will update the requirements more after some more testing.
Maybe for that part about clarity and timings. So as I mentioned, next step are grants. It should be done within a few weeks, I believe. Maybe Hugo will tell more at some point soon. But then it's kind of important to build this community of attestation providers, to build a critical mass. Those who are following our network, you are seeing this concept with FTSO provider. Initially, some groups started, but now it became very fierce competition, very stable prices, very nice community engaged on daily basis on Telegram. So there are 2 important parts just for our F-asset system, but then also for others, that we have a stable FTSO community and a stable attestation provider community. So we can expect like this gaining of this critical mass will be a matter of next few months. So starting with grants, getting critical mass for next few months, in meanwhile also designing the rewarding systems. Yeah. But the kind of all ideas go into direction of like having FTSO providers as the ones that are the most engaged in the community, like using them as also validators and attestation clients, the ones that are rewarded. These are the main ideas, in which direction the system is being designed and developed. But yeah, we are talking in a matter of next few months.
Thanks, Alan. That's great. There was a follow-up question, I think from XR Pennywise, just asking about the types of disks required. Basically,
Yes.
I think. Go on, sorry.
Yes, at the moment we are using SSDs. Hard drives would just prove to be too slow.
Okay, so SSDs are the way forward on that. And just going through the questions, I must say that that whole kind of idea of building the community of providers makes a lot of sense. I've been kind of in the Flare community for a little bit now. It's great to be here. It's great to see this turnout. So if anyone does have questions and they'd like to actually ask them in voice, then please feel free to pop the question in the Attestation Providers channel. We can have a quick look at it and then bring you up on stage. And are there any questions about different attestation types that people would like to ask?
Or maybe how to add attestation types and such questions, or
So I don't actually have a question regarding the attestation types, but I was wondering that, you mentioned about attestation providers getting some sort of reward. Where is this going to come from? Is it going to come from the Songbird inflation mechanism of 10%, or is it going to be paid in the form of maybe some funds from the Flare team themselves?
Yeah, so once the rewarding system is designed, this is the primary pool for this default attestation set. But we are also considering this more flexible options where the community can provide certain things, but that's way ahead. In general, we are aiming towards that for all these important things in a system, the inflation will be the main source for rewarding them, or the only, in essence.
I mean, other than grants, which usually that will come from the Flare pool.
But grants are more like for bootstrapping things,
yeah.
because exactly because of the expenses involved in both in running infrastructures and in being on track with adding new attestation types.
Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. Coming from the inflation certainly does make it more sustainable. So yeah, thank you for answering that question.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that question. We actually had the same question from Nerdherd and from Witter FTSO Benry, just about the process for adding new attestation types, and sort of about the different attestation types in general. Alan, would you be able to add a little bit more color on that?
Yes. So with attestation types, there are certain conditions that have to be fulfilled. Because we are using this Merkle tree system, if different attestation providers would have different view on data and make queries, and some would get certain answer, others different, it could destabilize the system in a sense because they would hardly reach consensus. So attestation types have to be carefully designed. So we call this that they are clear-cut decidable. Yeah? So that's one condition. Yeah? Other than that, we have that repository. We also published on Twitter state connector attestation types, where anyone who wants to propose can try to propose but try to kind of make a definition like it's done for existing 4 types, and then it's a matter of kind of review of the attestation provider community to see if this is really stable and it's important or so, and then basically when we kind of agree and see that the thing is well designed, yeah, then we implement it into the attestation client software, yeah, and then we have a system like where when we say we start with certain voting round using it all together, so we are synchronized, yeah. As I said, so this is quite a strict process, yeah. So, but we are thinking also on more flexible ways, like that certain attestation types can be developed by community, and when certain critical mass is gained around them, we found them interesting to include them to this main system. Yeah.
So
this is the main idea.
Review them and actually make sure that they are clear-cut decidable and that they can be used with a state connector system.
Thanks, that's great, guys. I had a question from Alice at FTSO Brazil. Just asking, Luca, would you be able to clarify a little bit about the state connector role? About attestation provider role and how they kind of fit into the state connector and why their role is so important in the Flare ecosystem.
As we kind of said, the attestation providers are listening to these requests that are made by different users or applications that actually use these attestation types in their process, and the attestation providers collect these queries and go out to real world and to different nodes on different blockchains and to different APIs on Web2 and kind of collect this data, process it, and create this Merkle tree that can then be accepted by the state connector system, and that we actually have the data that can be used by the devs and they can trust this data because it's validated in the same manner as everything else on Flare network. I hope this is
so basically you can imagine attestation clients or attestation client is a software, attestation providers or entities running them as independent verifiers. So somebody asks, I want to verify, as I said, this Bitcoin transaction, and then they independently, like 100 of them, they independently check on each one on maybe different Bitcoin node, read it out, and if they all agree on it, yeah, then we can believe this data. And then it's of course that system cryptographic proof how you can relay this data to a contract which can verify that it can be believed that this data is correct. So attestation client providers are independent verifiers, much like on blockchain you have validators are independent verifiers of transactions within the network, while validators are verifiers of data outside the network in order to reach kind of consensus which data to believe and bring into that.
So you're saying that the importance of that role is to provide the ability to come to consensus on external data, as in data off of the chain. Am I understanding that right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And you kind of, I guess the idea is the focus on decentralization, which is why kind of inviting people to become attestation providers is so important.
Yeah. So yeah, the more if those attestation providers are different entities that are independently verifying this data, the more decentralized the system is, and then more secure in a sense. Yeah.
We did have a follow-up question from CryptoSig 1991. This is Kevin from Oracle Beast FTSO. On that note, they were asking how many are in the default set. Are we able to provide a little bit more information about the number of different attestation providers that would be in the default set?
Not yet clearly defined, but we are kind of talking about like top 20-30% of FTSO providers. But we might as well decide that we will need more or even less. Yeah. So this will be decided at the point when we start giving grants, because the number of grants will indicate this.
Sure thing. That makes sense. We had a question from Benry at Witter FTSO, who's asking about the expected maximum throughput of the state connector as a whole and of each individual provider. Are we able to add a little bit more clarity on that point?
Yeah. So you can imagine that okay, maybe this submitting attestation request is very simple transaction on blockchain, and you can basically flood blockchain with those. Yeah. So when designing the attestation client, we had to take into account that we kind of limit the number of you can imagine checks on a specific source like Bitcoin, because if you get like million requests in very short time, then maybe you don't have time to check all of them. Yeah? So we do have internal mechanisms that in a synchronized manner, like in terms of global settings, decide what is the throughput for certain type of attestations on specifically for specific data source, meaning like blockchain or Ripple, because these things are pretty parallel to check. Yeah. So in essence, the speed of accepting requests is as high as blockchain can swallow, but we are kind of artificially limiting it because each request needs certain checks, and then it's basically initially we will set some limits, and then we will see how the infrastructure handles it and then increases. So it would be like initial setting would be around 1,000 requests per like one round, which is 90-second window for collecting data, a request for one verification.
Sure thing. And so when a new attestation type is added and approved, how long will providers have to implement the new type in their system? How does that work?
Similarly, like validator node, which is implemented by us, yeah, the attestation client is also implemented by us. We might, in a similar manner, like Ethereum had alternative implementation of nodes, encourage probably also to grants alternative implementations of attestation provider, but it will not be like with FTSO data providers, where basically all that they have in common is a submission system, yeah, but the main source and most of the work is on data analytics, data collection. Everybody has its own algorithm. Here it's different. It's more like a validator node concept, yeah. It's kind of implemented client already, yeah? And it just needs to be accepted, implemented, reviewed by community. We also plan auditing of this code, yeah. And then once this is implemented and decided, then it's just a matter of configuration when we say, okay, this version of a client should be used from certain voting round on. And it's designed in such a way that you can install immediately the newest version, and it will be able to switch just between the rounds.
So the main idea that software is kind of public, and there are just a few alternative implementations of this attestation suite. So people should monitor them more than develop them.
Okay, that makes sense. Had a question from African Proofs asking how will the top X price providers to form the default set be decided? Are there sort of planned metrics that have already been discussed to be used, or is that still kind of in process at this time?
Actually, some ideas are being investigated already. But in general, what I can say is a metric. It's a combination of activity in a network, meaning part of activity is decided by vote power, the other part is decided by reward rate, and then as you can. Data providers or FTSO data providers already know how big differences between the most successful ones and less successful ones. We are considering of smoothing this, that like these are the main input factors, but then it's more smooth. Like it's not tenfold difference. It's maybe just few 10% difference between the good one and excellent one, say. Yeah? So we are still, we have one metrics, it's not yet, I'm not sure if we mentioned it on a community call, maybe not, but this is the main idea, considering the merit in the network and smoothing it so it's not so diverse that maybe the better data providers have certain benefits, but not like of order of magnitude.
Right, that makes sense. There was a question actually about sort of more about dApps. It would be great to kind of cover this. We kind of wanted to find out what does a dApp need to receive attestations for existing attestation types and also for new attestation types. What are the requirements there? Are we able to provide more detail on that?
Yeah, so basically an essential part of, let's say the dApp is based on smart contract, yeah, and then this smart contract has to have verify function, meaning if somebody submits the proof, and as I mentioned, proof consists of the data, extracted data, Merkle proof, and the round ID in which it was confirmed. And actually the procedure is then very much standardized. Maybe you can, if who is interested more in details, you can look in the documentation on the technical documentation for attestation client. In it's one chapter or subsection verification. But the main idea, functional idea is like when contracts get those three pieces of data, what it can do, as I mentioned, it can calculate hash of the data. Then it can apply Merkle proof. This should technically result in a candidate of a Merkle root that should be confirmed. Using the third piece of data, which is the index of the round, the contract reads from the state connector contract what was the confirmed Merkle root of that round, and if this confirmed Merkle root from this round matches to the one we got through that data, hash data, applying Merkle proof. The contract knows, okay, this data is confirmed. And then basically it has the data, the extracted data, because the user has provided them as a part of a proof. And it can start to read, okay, I can believe this data, now I read, okay, was it sent from this address? Was it sent to this address? Yeah. How much was sent? Was the payment reference correct? This kind of things. So technically the contract needs a standardized implementation of verification, and then from the proof that's submitted, it can use the data and continue the logic what it has. And we also have these standardized implementations on a repository. You can check them.
Cool. We did have a follow-up question from Alice at FTSO Brazil, but I think David might have started to answer the question in the attestation providers channel. But they were asking if an FTSO can share infrastructure with smaller FTSOs in case they can't afford the required hardware to become an attestation provider.
Yeah, sorry, I answered this one because we already kind of touched that one. At the beginning, yes, but later, as I wrote here, we will everyone will have to have its own nodes to maximize centralization.
Thanks for answering that. I think we're kind of drawing to the close here. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, please pop them in the chat quickly. Otherwise, NerdHerd just asked, will we need static IPs to launch?
A part of attestation suite is a web server which has API root. We call this proof app API. And basically, a data provider, after it votes for a certain round and after the commit phase, time of commit phase passes, it publishes what it voted. Yeah? This means like, okay, I voted for this 1,000 requests. This was the request data, this is the extracted data, and this is the hash. And from that, anybody, so this is primarily intended for users to construct the proofs that they are submitting. So each attestation provider will be required to have API or website supporting API, this proof API, and basically the users will, so the workflow for a user will be, okay, I submit to the state connector contract the request, wait like 4 or 5 minutes, and then I see that the voting went through, and then it goes to any of the attestation clients and checks what did this attestation club client provider vote for, and then they will check, oh, you voted correctly, okay, so you have the correct data that went into Merkle tree, so I can have this data, construct my proof from it, and apply to contract. So in regard to this question, will attestation providers have to have a fixed IP just for that server, or maybe you could say they should have a domain where they will provide this API, because it can happen. You cannot rely on only one attestation provider every time, because exactly for that round, that attestation provider may have voted wrong, but the majority vote was by others. So you would have to have few of them, and then read the data they voted on through them, so you can be able to reconstruct the vote, the proof. And we also have all the examples and libraries how to communicate with this API and how to reconstruct the proof to be submitted to the API.
Thanks, Alan. That's great. There was a question basically regarding the testing for the system. Jonan from Nortso was asking about sort of testing of attestation providers before assets go live, and whether we'll start with any specific asset or go all at once. And Pennywise was kind of confirming that question with sort of how will we test the whole system? Is this something we can cover a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah. So initially we, or maybe David started.
No, it's okay. Well, we will have spammers that will randomly submit attestations, so everybody who is testing can just plug in and listen to that and see what's happening. So this is also covered.
Yeah, that's the part if anyone wants to test how it works, yeah. But then in terms of that question, how we will kind of bootstrap the system, stabilize it, and then use it for asset system, you can imagine, as I already mentioned, similar like FTSO system. The system, if we would just deploy everything, we would have like all the components like FTSO, the state connector, and FAssets, and just deploy it wouldn't work. It for FTSO system to be reliable, a community around it had to be built, and now the system is stable. We believe we had like a week or two ago, like some issues with the pegging of USDT and prices, and now it's very intensive talks in community how to make this more robust, and many of members already did some provisions in that direction. But what I want to say, for FTSO system, we have now quite a stable system, quite a stable oracle for prices, yeah. And now we have to bootstrap this attestation system. And once these two systems are stable, we can start to kind of run in a controlled manner FAsset system, FAsset system, yeah. And we plan that this will start in very controlled manner, as those who know the one of the important stakeholders in the FAsset systems are agents. We'll probably have them KYC'd, very well identified. We'll have limited amounts. So the most important thing is well-designed smart contracts, which are audited. We already implemented them. Now we are preparing for audit for FAsset system. But also for a system to work, we have to have a stable FTSO system. We have it, and stable attestation providers system. Yeah? So this is why these things maybe take more time than somebody would imagine. Yeah? But it's really important that those systems like FTSO and attestation system is very stable, very reliable, and robust. Yeah? Otherwise, the security implications for other DApps, including FAsset systems, are not very strong.
That makes sense. Thanks, Alan. That's great. I think with that question, go on, sorry.
Yeah, maybe I want to add just this thing. That's why our choice that we started with the Canary Network Songbird, it turned out very important, because once we establish a stable FTSO community, stable attestation providers community, it's very easy to say, okay, now we can just move it with same infrastructure. You can use the same infrastructure on Coston, on Songbird, and on Flare. Yeah, you can just move it. I would say the working community. Yeah, the one that gained critical mass and ensures the stability of the system.
But even after the Flare network is live, we're sure that the community will keep developing and moving forward. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's as Simon said, a great start for everyone.
Great. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time today, Alan, Luca, David, Tom, and listen, everyone who's here, thank you so much for joining us on this Q&A regarding attestation providers. It's much appreciated to everyone who turned up, asked the questions, and are in the process of helping us build this network. So thank you for coming. I'm sure that if you were to continue asking questions in the Discord server, then they will be answered by the team when they can. And my intention is to sort of try and make sure that we're able to put on these kinds of Q&A sessions on a sort of a semi-regular basis, so that people have the opportunity to ask questions of the team. But as mentioned, if you go into the chat, there's definitely someone who will be able to help you in the meantime. So yeah, thanks everyone, and have a very lovely Wednesday.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah,
Thanks.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Mission Control, we have liftoff.